Hi, boys and girls. Well, here we are. We're stuck at home, and I guess we're trying to think of things to do. So, you know what? I thought that since we haven't been together, and I don't know when we can be together again, let's do something that we can do that we all like. And I personally like to read books, and so here I'm sharing a wonderful book with you, a story that I really like, and it's called The Great Horn Spoon. So I would like you to get a pen and maybe a book or a paper, where you can take notes and try to keep everything together till the end of the book. So, it'll be like a nice scrapbook of this book. All right. So, ready? Are you ready to listen to a really great story? Here we go. By the Great Horn Spoon by Sid Fleischman. Chapter 1. The Stowaways. A sailing ship with two great side wheels went splashing out of Boston Harbor on a voyage around the Horn to San Francisco. Below decks, in the creaking darkness of her cargo hold, there sat 18 barrels of potatoes. Inside two barrels, side by side, there squatted two stowaways. So, as you know, the ship sailed from Boston Harbor, which is on the east coast of United States, and it's sailing around the Horn. It says to San Francisco, so it's trying to get to the west coast. But as you know, this ship is going around Cape Horn, which is on the bottommost tip of South America, and so this is a story about two people taking that voyage, and it's based in the time of the gold rush, so in the 1849s, 1850s. And here we go. It was not once upon a time. It was precisely 27th day of January in the year 1949. Gold had been discovered in California some 12 months before, and now, in a rush, the gold rush was on. The good ship Lady Wilma, overcrowded and heavy in the water with cargo, thrashed her way to the sea. Her paddle wheels churned and her smokestack stained the frozen winter sky like ink. She was bound for Gold Fields with 183 passengers, not counting the stowaways. Hundreds of gold seekers had been left at the dock, clamoring for passage. The California fever was sweeping through the cities and towns and villages like a heady wind. Men were buying picks and shovels and trying to get from the East Coast to the West as soon as possible and all at once. Notice the author's craft moves. The similes make me get a really vivid picture. If you look at the sentence, the smokestack staining the frozen winter sky like ink. Can you get that image in your head where it's smoke, the black smoke in the sky, and it's kind of like a wavy pattern of smoke? Also, the California fever was sweeping through the cities and towns and villages like a heady wind. I can almost picture like hordes and hordes of people trying to rush to California in different ways, and just like a heavy wind blowing. On the second day at sea, just after dawn, the lid rose silently off a potato barrel. Cautiously, a man raised his eyes above the rim of the barrel to look about. Slowly, he unfolded his long arms and legs. Then he stood, an elegant gentleman in a black broadcoat coat. He would be the first to admit that being folded up in a barrel with a bowler hat balanced on his knees was not the most comfortable way to travel. Now he brushed off the hat and placed it smartly on his head. He hooked a black umbrella on his arm, for he never traveled without it, and pulled on a pair of spotless white gloves. He felt very nearly frozen solid, but permitted himself a most contented smile. Then he gave a small tap to the barrel beside him. "All clear, Master Jack." "Is that you, Praiseworthy?" came a young, muffled voice from the depths of the barrel. "Your obedient servant," The man replied and lifted the lid. There rose from this barrel a schoolboy of 12. He had been sucking a raw potato to slake his thirst. A patch of hair fell across his forehead in a yellow scribble. Ooh, another simile out there. Actually, this is a metaphor because can you see how the hair is compared to the yellow scribble, but they're not using as or like there? So a metaphor paints a vivid picture about the looks of the boy. He had never been so cold, hungry, or miserable in his life. On the other hand, he had never been so happy. He wouldn't have traded places with anyone. His pepper black eyes were considerably brightened with the fever of adventure. He smelled of potatoes from head to toe. His thin nose, which was smudged, felt like an icicle, but he permitted himself a most contented smile. "We made it, Praiseworthy," he said. "We did indeed, Master Jack." Jack gazed at the dark cargo shapes piled high around them and listened to the scrape of the sea along the wooden hull. He thought of home and Aunt Arabella and the friendly blaze in the big stone fireplace. There was no turning back now. They were on their way to the goldfields. "Hungry?" asked Praiseworthy. "I could eat, I guess," said Jack, who didn't want to give the impression that he had any complaints. "Cold?" "I've been colder, I guess," said Jack, although he couldn't think when. I suggest that we see what can be done about improving our accommodation," said Praiseworthy, tapping his bowler hat firmly in place. "Shall we go?" "Go?" Jack replied. "Go where?" He fully expected to pass the voyage below decks with the cargo. He had read dire accounts of treatment handed out to stowaways on ships of the sea. "Why, to pay our respects to the captain," said Praiseworthy. "The captain?" The words were nearly caught in his throat. "But he'll put us in chains, or worse." "Leave that to me," said Praiseworthy with an airy lift of an eyebrow. "Come along, Master Jack." Jack gathered courage from Praiseworthy's cool reassurance. As far back as Jack could remember, he had never known anything to ruffle Praiseworthy's calm. In his black bowler hat, his black coat, and spotless white gloves, he was easily mistaken for a professional man, a lawyer, perhaps, or a young doctor. But he was nothing of the sort. Praiseworthy was a butler. Guys, butlers were people who kind of took care of the household and did almost all the work, like looking after the house, looking after how the house was managed, and generally rich people used to have butlers in their houses. He was a butler by breeding, by training, and by choice. More than once, Jack had heard Aunt Arabella say that Praiseworthy was the finest English butler in Boston. He had been with Jack's family since before Jack could remember. It seemed to him there had always been a Praiseworthy. The ship gave a lurch, and the stowaways, gathering up their 2 carpet bags, picked their way through the darkened passages of the hold. The hold, boys and girls, is like the compartment that's under the ship where most of the luggage is kept. That's called a hold. And carpet bags are kind of fabric bags that people used to carry. They didn't have suitcases like we do back now, like, you know, with rollers. Moving on. Jack saw barrels of smoked fish bound for San Francisco. There were thousands of feet of lumber and enough bricks to build a hotel. He saw boxes of rifles and 2 brass cannons to fight off wild Indians, as he supposed, and he could make out wet bundles of grape cuttings, enough to plant a vineyard. Does that sound like a familiar to you? They were coming to California, vineyards. I guess they did make that vineyard, huh? With his heart thumping, Jack followed Praiseworthy up a ship's ladder to the creaking deck above. He was sure the captain would put them in chains at the very least. Now, the whistling of the wind came to them, and the thrashing of the great side wheels seemed as loud as thunder. Ooh, another simile. They found themselves in the crew's quarters where daylight barely penetrated. A sailor with a gold ring dancing in his ear was filling a lamp with whale oil. You see, boys and girls, whale oil was a very important kind of oil for lamps back then. They used to also make soaps, and you wouldn't believe explosives were made with whale oil in World War I and World War II. And so whaling back then was a very, very important occupation, and it was a very dangerous one also. You might be also surprised to know that whale oil is also used in Hubble telescope as a lubricant. So here's a website. Look and research about whales on this website, and then write 6 to 7 sentences about what you learn, and then write what you think. Remember the sentence prompt, this makes me realize that ... So go ahead and do that right now. My good fellow, said Praiseworthy, can you direct me to the captain? The sailor looked up with a curious squint, and the ring in his ear did a jig. The wild bull of the seas? Aye, mates. He lifted a wet thumb as a pointer. Up there. Now, apparently the captain is called the wild bull of the seas. Pause for a moment and think about what kind of a person might he be. Can you predict looking at the name? It makes me kind of wonder whether he must be probably a large man, I think, and probably strong. I think he has a very loud voice. He could be a very strict person, I think, and also very brave. Up there they went, climbing another ladder to another deck, and now Jack was sure the captain would have them walking the plank, at the very least. Wild bull of the seas! But Praiseworthy was a match for anyone, he told himself, and tried to keep a straight and firm jaw. They entered the main saloon, where shivering passengers were swarming like bees around 2 pot-bellied stoves. Look at the author's craft moves again. Can you just picture that scenario where the passengers were swarming like bees and they were around 2 pot-bellied stoves, like big fat stoves? Everyone seemed to be talking at once and saying the same thing. You've been hogging that stove long enough. I got here first. Let me in, partner. Jack saw men of every description, and some who defied description. There were lanky farm boys in rough boots and dandies in tight pantaloons. There were Yankees in beaver hats and Southerners in planters' hats. There were tradesmen and politicians, Frenchmen and Dutchmen, fat men, thin men, gentlemen and scoundrels, with not a woman among them. They were bound for Goldfields, which was no place for women and children. So this is what they're talking about. Give me a turn at the stove, gents. Stop pushing, sir. Praiseworthy tapped the nearest gold seeker on the shoulder, a frock-coated man with a sword cane, and inquired, Can you direct me to the captain, sir? The man lifted his sword cane and pointed. Up there, he snapped, and returned to the fray. In due time, after climbing another ladder, the 2 stowaways found the captain in his cabin, with the door banging open and shut with the roll of the ship. He had just come in from the deck, and his wet oilskins lay in a heap. The wild bull of the seas, his legs apart, stood bent over a long table. He was trying to thaw the ice in his curly black whiskers over a lighted candle. I think that kind of goes with his name, the wild bull, because trying to put a candle on his whiskers. Whiskers is like mustaches. So think about if somebody got frozen mustaches because of the cold, would they try thawing it with a lighted candle? So he was, I guess, not afraid of taking any risks. Well, don't just stand there inviting in the weather, he said in a voice like a roar of a cannon. Come in.